There is no free speech debate here. Free speech on its own is as meaningful as lawlessness in a society where
Hello?
some people have guns and the other are naked and unarmed. There's nothing here that's worth defending. It's
We
debated in
might need
some
to
countries.
unpack
Well,
what you mean.
the
We might need to
majority,
unpack what you mean by capitalism is the priest class.
the
I was hoping to make an argument for the innate value of misinformation being spread on the internet.
sure. What is the innate value of misinformation being spread on the internet?
Hello?
Howdy.
Howdy. How are you doing, Mr. Vaush?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Mr. Logic Guy?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for asking.
All right, hit me up. Why did you want to talk to me this fine day? Give us some context.
So I specifically wanted to respond to a take of yours. I saw. Free speech is only valuable socially if it is meaningful and if it helps us arrive at moral and truthful positions. That's the part that I disagree with. My own position is that free speech does apply to immoral and untruthful speech as well. And it is right to protect people's right to spread misinformation.
Yeah, so there are degrees to this. It's really about the rules that you set and the effects that they have. So, for example, if you had freedom of speech with absolutely no limitations, that could potentially include stuff like harassment, death threats, doxing people. And for that reason, we do have some limits, though even that is a concession against free speech extremism. The issue that I have is that much like, say, for example, a free market, free speech is a tool which is more powerful when used by some over others. And it's easy to imagine, because it's what's happening today, a situation in which free speech is used to suppress or to have a chilling effect on the free speech of others, that there's a kind of mutual exclusivity there. And if that's the case, I feel like you're not getting anything meaningful from the institution.
Sometimes people have applied the term free speech absolutist to me because I am vocally against hate speech laws, Holocaust denial laws, and specifically I'm opposed to deplatforming or shutting down people for misinformation. I don't think that big tech censorship is a good solution to misinformation. I think it's morally wrong, and I also think it's pragmatically wrong.
What do you mean by big tech censorship?
I mean like Facebook decide
What's
I don't know.
immoral about a social media company deciding they don't want to have their bandwidth hosting content they feel is socially destructive?
Well, I think that where I think the harm is in one private company like Facebook, controlling whatever their share of news information is and dictating to us what the terms are. I don't think they or anyone should have the right to do that. I think it should belong to the people.
So that I agree with. Let's get rid of the private company issue. Let's say that all this was nationalized by the government. I still think the government would have a right to enforce terms of service limitations on behavior on their platform.
You said you agreed with me. I guess I got lost. What part specifically did you agree with?
I don't like big tech companies monopolizing discourse, but I don't think that really has anything to do with the nature of terms of service requirements or TOS or censorship.
It's not so much that they're monopolizing discourse. It's that they control the switch to what speech is allowable. It is not reasonable for one company to hold the control over internet discourse. That's not a reasonable position. I think it's anti-democracy.
Would your position on this change if it was a democratically controlled, state-run institution?
If it was democratically controlled, I would have a different opinion.
We need TOS, don't we? I mean, these sites couldn't really function otherwise.
There is no rule that Facebook could make about modifying its about moderating its platform that wouldn't be tyrannical.
Well, that's what I mean. It's not really TOS then, right? That'd be like me talking about like a potentially good law I could implement. Somebody saying like, "Well, I don't want America to implement any law. America's a tyrannical nation, needs to be broken up." And I'm like, "Well, do you think the law's okay?" And they're like, "Well, I don't care about the law. I don't think America should be doing it." Well, yeah, sure. If your position is that these companies should be broken up or nationalized, democratized, whatever, fine. But all them smaller Facebooks are going to have TOS. They're going to need TOS. So in the meantime, I don't see a TOS as being an issue. And I don't think a TOS free Facebook now would necessarily be better or any less autocratic, because we're not talking about TOS primarily. The main way they get you is through their algorithms and their site design. They don't need to ban people to control people, just choosing what types of content you show up. And those are proprietary. They don't disclose their algorithms. So you'll never know what they're using. They're legally incentivized to keep them quiet. That's the way they actually manufacture discourse. The TOS is just the obvious, overt crap that they can, like really evident stuff they can crack down on. So I don't know if there's a way to meaningfully challenge this power through the TOS argument outside of the broader thing, which is, breaking them up, nationalizing them, whatever you want to do.
It wasn't my intention to come on here and debate big tech TOS. I actually wanted to make a. Let me try to decouple my argument from TOS.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a greater good being served by allowing misinformation to be propagated through the internet. What I was hoping to make was an argument for the innate value of misinformation being spread on the internet.
Sure. What is the innate value of misinformation being spread on the internet?
Okay. Before I get into that, I had a question about your original comment in that video clip, because you said free speech is only valuable socially if it is meaningful and if it helps us arrive at moral and truthful positions. What do you mean by meaningful there? Because I would say that speech is necessarily meaningful. If it's not meaningful, it's noise.
No, I don't think that. Well, I think a lot of speech is noise. I think that's a lot of punditry these days, where speech is just sort of the catch-all term that we have to describe what people do when they open their mouths and exhale air. But in terms of meaningful speech, like it goes beyond that. There are plenty of people who will use free speech to deliberately spread misinformation to serve the interests and power of people who are worth millions of times what you and I are, right? That to me, I mean, it's meaningful in the sense that if they wanted to, you could use free speech in a way to construct a very autocratic society through manufacturing consent. Imagine, for example, a dystopian world in which all the pundits, all the media figures are actually on the bankrolls of a handful of very powerful media moguls that work in tandem with incredibly influential industries to spread misinformation, which lead people to willingly vote in favor of companies and politicians and what have you that are against their interests. You could theoretically, without ever violating freedom of speech, conduct kind of an autocracy where people are just blindly led from point to point. Hard as it may be to imagine, I think that free speech has to be meaningful. It's not valuable in and of itself. Nothing is. It has to serve a good interest. It has to lead to a good outcome. And unfortunately, the biggest champions of free speech, not talking about you, but the biggest so-called champions of free speech.
No, I am the biggest champion of free speech.
Well, are the people who believe in it the least, the conservatives, who, and they know this, they don't give a fuck about free speech, but they scream
I
free
agree
speech.
with you about this, by the way.
Yeah, because they don't have good points, so the best way for them to substitute in affirmative arguments for their position is merely to argue that they have the right to have their shitty positions and pretend everyone else thinks they don't. So free speech should be meaningful. It has to lead to good outcomes. I'm not talking about a law prohibiting like certain people or certain political ideologies from talking. I'm just saying philosophically you have to make a justification for the right to free speech. And I think that you can make that justification in ways that excise certain types of speech, which you believe as well, which is why you said libel and slander are things that the government should be able to crack down on you for. To put it another way, okay? I feel like in Nazi Germany, if there was freedom of speech, and there wasn't, but if there was, an implementation of hate speech laws would increase the utility of freedom of speech in that country, not decrease it. A restriction on what people could say would actually lead to a more free expression of thought. I'm only saying that there are ways in which limitations to accessible or allowed speech can actually improve the quality of speech. You have to agree with this because you believe in the validity of libel and slander laws. You think that if there are legal consequences to defamatory speech, that improves the quality of speech.
In the clip, you advocated something far more broad. You said that that if people use their right to free speech to spread disinformation, which leads to harm, then that would be an element of our free speech which we must excise. That is a far broader standard.
Yeah, but it's not a legal standard. I'm talking about aspirations, goals.
Okay.
We should always work to fight against misinformation, I don't think that's I don't even think that's a controversial take, really. You should work to excise elements of free speech that are misinformation. I mean, yeah, sure. Fine, right. But I'm not saying you can't do that necessarily through a law, except for, I guess, libel and slander laws, which we already have. You'd have to sort of take a broader approach. And whether that's social media companies have TOS against this, that, or the other, or maybe laws against stochastic terrorism, which we don't really have in the United States.
Yeah, that's a term that makes me really, really uncomfortable. I think that stochastic terrorism is a term that should make the left kind of uncomfortable.
Well, it would really depend on whatever legal standard was set for it. Now, obviously, if the legal threshold was set so low that anyone expressing any antagonism at any time leading to any kind of harm could be held legally culpable, then that would be a pretty bad law. We have to recognize that the world has changed substantially over the past few decades, and a lot of the harm that we see...
Let me ask you something, Vaush.
I just want to say, a lot of the harm we see socially isn't done in ways that are accounted for legally right now. I mean, far more people died because of COVID misinformation in 2020 than people who died to murders, by a massive amount. But murderers get put in jail, and COVID misinformation peddlers sleep in mansions. So the law is not aligning perfectly with, retribution or punishment or rehabilitation for those doing the most harm. Maybe that's something to be looked at. Maybe speech laws invented before the internet aren't perfectly applicable in a world where a random person can have their words heard by millions overnight. Maybe there are changes that can be made. I don't know the answer to this.
That was true before the internet, though. I mean, Lauren Boebert didn't say anything on the internet. She said something on the floor of Congress.
Yeah, because of modern video distribution networks. I mean,
sure, but we had mass communication before the internet. We had
but she was a politician.
And even radio.
I said random person. I mean, she's a politician. You could get on TV as a politician, but now it could be like anyone, right? And even then, a lot of our speech laws were written before television was super common. So I'm only saying this isn't about.
I think our first speech law was written before television was invented, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm a big fan of the First Amendment. I just think it's worth taking a look at. I'm not an absolutist about any kind of law. It's always worth examining these things.
The reason why I want to come on and defend the rights of anti-vaxxers and COVID conspiracy theorists is because I think that, and it sounds corny, but I think that free inquiry, democratic discourse, whatever, it's corny. I think that's how we determine what's true. I think without open discourse, without free inquiry, I think what we're left with is some sort of priest class dictating to us what's true.
The issue is we already have a priest class. It's capital. What you're saying right now would be valid if we lived in a fair, equal, democratic society, but we don't. Right now, we have political positions that are taken as issues worthy of debate simply because billionaires thought it worthy of instilling in the population a need to debate. Climate change is not debated world round. It's debated in some countries.
We might need to unpack what you mean.
The majority,
we might need to unpack what you mean by capitalism is the priest class. I think I agree, but I'm not sure.
The countries with the most fervent discourse about whether or not climate change exists are countries in which there are Murdoch-run media companies. Our discourse on climate change, COVID vaccines, a ton of other stuff is only had because we don't really have freedom of speech. What we have is, like everything else in this country, a system where people with more wealth have more power, and those people have a financial interest in investing in certain subjects to the extent that they become means for discourse, which is why before talking to you, I had to spend an hour and 40 minutes watching a TPUSA conference that opened with 5 minutes.
I was wondering why you did that. I'm still
how
not
they
sure I understand.
how they care about the American people, and then an hour 35 minutes talking about wokeness, CRT, Lincoln statues, and pregnancy flight suits. The COVID shit, the only reason this is debated here, the literal only reason, and it's similar in other countries, but particularly bad here. The only reason this is debated is because the way in which COVID manufactured itself, the way in which it was produced, was one in which Trump could not handle politically without making an adversary of the virus. And in doing so, he made it a political issue. Therefore, his mishandling of COVID led to Democrats' role as the group to pick up the mess, so to speak, and therefore it has to be politicized in a way to demonize any proposed solutions Democrats offer. That's why Trump supported the vaccines back when he was the one who greenlit them with Operation Warp Speed. So now Democrats are the ones considered to be the gatekeepers of the vaccine. So Republicans pretend to care about the vaccine rights issue by making a political issue out of something that they would be on the other side of if they had been the ones in power during their implementation. That's it. There's no free speech here. And there are people like Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein who are either stupid enough to believe it or smart enough to make money off the millions of Americans roped into discourse that was manufactured from the top down by billionaires telling millionaire pundits how to carefully deliver misinformation in such a way as to avoid legal liability while nonetheless misinforming the public. There is no free speech debate here. Free speech on its own is as meaningful as lawlessness in a society where some people have guns and the other are naked and unarmed. There's nothing here that's worth defending.
The right to be wrong gives us permission to think, right? Because to think about it for ourselves and figure out where we land on something, we have to try new things. We have to risk failure. We have to risk humiliation. We might just get it wrong. And invariably some of us are, and we need to have that freedom to do it.
It's not about the right to be wrong.
That's how we get the guy who gets it right.
It's the right for powerful people to spend millions producing calculated bullshit.
No, I'm saying I oppose that. I'm saying we need to decentralize and democratize.
Okay, well, I agree with that.
And giving more power to Google and Facebook isn't doing that.
Having them up TOS doesn't give them more power. They already have the power.
I thought we got off of TOS a long time ago.
Well, then what are we talking about when we talk about giving them more power? What power am I giving them?
What specifically I'm talking about is the amount of market share that companies like Facebook, or I guess call them Meta now, control. That's specifically.
Wait, when you talk about social media companies determine what we can or can't say, talk about us relying on them to protect us, you're talking about TOS. I just don't understand. Even if you got rid of the algorithm stuff, Google, whatever, it would still have a monopoly on the system. Because you'd be removing it from all the social media sites. They'd still have a monopoly.
Yeah. I mean, it's a damn shame. It's a damn shame. Who you got up next? I know you've got like a whole queue of debates. Who's next?
Oh, I'm not trying to kick you off or anything.
Yeah.
I agree that these systems should be democratized, nationalized, whatever. I don't think the TOS is really an issue. There are good TOSs and bad TOSs. Sure, I'll argue against the bad ones, but.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, I do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was very good.
All right, be well. All right, we went around in circles a little bit there, but I think we hit some of the points.
Ilhan Omar's a terrorist?